Hello and welcome to this final video. I think it might be 5, lost count, which is the explainer of the Embracing Risk framework, broken up obviously because there's a fair bit to it. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much. We're going to go into detail about the implementation process, what it actually looks like to step through it. And this is sort of going to be one single slide. So first of all, I just want to sort of talk about just these two underpinning ideas. I've mentioned it earlier, but implementing the framework or doing culture change needs culture specific strategies and activities. So that's what that sort of top left box is about. And these are by necessity different from some other safety or some other business strategies. They are by necessity sometimes less structured. So, it is about creating aligned meaning and focus. So that's part of the things with culture. If culture is about shared beliefs and assumptions, then we want to create that more intentionally. So we're trying to do that around what does safety mean, as well as doing it around things like culture and risk and, what good safety thinking looks like or whatever it might be. But that's the underlying process here, right? Is we're trying to actually intentionally create more aligned thinking and focus. We're trying to shift the language. So because culture is about shared beliefs for me, you can't actually see it. All we can see it is in the sort of artifacts or the external bits, so the language, the behavior, the signs, symbols, sounds of the organization. Then language is crucial. Now, therefore, we kind of listen for culture through language, but also we can influence shared beliefs through language. This is priming that's happening. And so part of the strategy that you saw in the last video was shift the actual language of the organization to help anchor around that safe day model, and also to prime and support different, I'm wary of saying different or better. It's just a slightly different way of looking at safety anyway, by looking at it through risk. Anchoring to curiosity and learning. So I've got that there. I said be curious and anchor to learning. I'll talk about those together. This is probably really more of a broad thing of shifting closer to accepting that you can never be 100%, that there's risk in everything. If that's the case, then what do, right? We can't give up. So we want to learn, we want to be curious. That's a strategy. It's the viable alternative. We don't give up, but we want to have a viable alternative. Now, partly that also means we can learn more, and it's also a strategy, particularly the anchoring to learning. It's a strategy to offset overcorrecting. So how do we sort of stop ourselves just consistently, every time something goes wrong, coming up with a fix? Well, I think we need a strategy. It's ironically like a system solution, right? You need a stopgap. So what you do is, instead of saying, what are we doing about it? You say, what do we know about it, right? You anchor to what do we know? So we learn first, then decide if we need to fix. And that becomes a strategy that leaders and organizations adopt. So they do their investigation around the model, but then sort of go, well, now that we've done our investigation, maybe we don't need to fix anything, or maybe we do. So it's actually just a strategy, because I think sometimes within an organization, if you said, do we actually need to do that? I think organizations sometimes might be like, well, people, by the way, not organizations, would be saying, well, not really, but we didn't know what else to do. As in, that shows that there's this anchor to you have to do something. So what you have to do is learn. And then sometimes what you learn is there was no way of fixing that, or there's no way of correcting that, or there was. So anchor to learning and being curious are both strategies for leaders to adopt there and the organization. Storytelling is a classic culture tool. So stories are like a secondhand experience, and stories go to collective beliefs, as opposed to telling, which is more of a knowledge tool. So telling and training are still appropriate, but storytelling can be an intentional method to shift beliefs. If you want to encourage people to speak up, you tell stories about how people have done it. That's why we do lessons learned. And it's also why, for so much of this stuff, there are elements of it that already exist in some safety areas, but it's typically been applied through a systems thinking philosophy, or it's been over applied. We keep going with it. And that's why I think I'm not suggesting that this is like a radical solution, but it's got to be applied within a different set of thinking. So it can't be like, what else do we measure? It's more as, what else do we focus on? So it's asking a different question. What if we focused on not what does safety look like, but what keeps us safe? And we forget that what safety looks like, because that might not be answerable in a measurable way anyway. So refine systems and processes. So we go through and we start simplifying and taking away from, because it's just one of the things if we've flooded people and overloaded them, we need to be able to pull back. But you use the model and the framework to kind of go, let's focus on what's critical. So you're not just chucking stuff out. You've got a proper story, so that if you say we're going to go to a weekly checklist instead of a daily check, and then somebody challenges you on it or says, why did you do that? You go, well, what was happening is people were doing a daily checklist. We engaged with them and they said, to be honest, this doesn't change very much day to day. We looked at our data and it showed that. We then thought about our psychology of risk and we realized we were probably building up people's autopilot on that checklist. So we're actually reducing the effectiveness of the checklist by making them fill it out every day. And we feel by going to a weekly checklist, but then having a daily quick 2-minute chat about it, we can get the best parts of a daily check and then the best parts of a formal checklist by doing it every week. That's what our thinking was. Our data's backed it up. We haven't had any more events or faults go wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. That's a really compelling story. That's not just we got rid of it because people didn't like it, right? And you can tell that by using the model and the framework and the thinking. Support chronic unease. So basically resist overconfidence, resist 100%, but that's done through language. Focus on critical activities and processes. So in implementing this too, you wouldn't try and change everything. You try and focus on key engagement activities, induction, pre-start, maybe some risk assessment activities. How do you maybe your due diligence. So you're not going to change everything. You take a risk-based approach and focus on what's critical first, and then make sure you've got skin in the game as much as possible. I get it's awkward sometimes for some of you, but genuine engagement. So I'll show you in a second what this looks like rolling it out, but essentially there's the process is sort of senior leaders, managers, supervisors and workers all get exposed to this. And ideally it starts with senior leaders so that you can tell the story and say, this is what we've been doing so far. We'd like your input and your help. That's skin in the game, as opposed to you've got a duty of care. This is what you have to, this is your responsibility. Like, it's just such a different conversation. So it's engaging people in the process and getting feedback and listening. Out of that, I mentioned earlier, you sort of got to look at, do our leaders have the capability and the skills to support this type of work? So there is typically a need to upskill maybe, or engage with leaders and sort of supervisors and managers to check and maybe build up some of their capacity in this area about culture and influencing others, and the use of language and engagement and understanding psychology of risk and understanding why people do certain things and why they don't. So there's often an upskilling piece in there. What it looks like rolling out, and no, this sort of so far, sort of I've never had one single process where it went this way, but this is an approximation. There's usually some framing and priming at the beginning, and maybe not in this order, but essentially a senior leader, usually a where are we now, and then some sort of senior leader alignment session. So the where are we now is just some discussion. It can be formal or informal. It could be literally just, a conversation with key stakeholders, or it could actually be doing a full my profile safety culture audit, or it could be me, spending days in the organization, just spending time with people, learning about what's going on. But it's essentially sort of going, where are we now and what's going on? So you get a little bit of a baseline of kind of the key drivers and the key sort of shared beliefs and feelings. And then a senior leader alignment session, which is, in the end, my experience is you've got to have CEO, you need senior leader on board up front. Often there'd be a pre-engagement, and then this is a group opportunity so that, just in case some people are a bit more skeptical than others, there's an alignment process in a group area. And that's where you introduce some of these core ideas. Can we accidentally increase risk in the name of safety? Can we solve everything? Introducing wicked problems and introducing culture ideas and just getting some of the really foundational beliefs going. Risk as uncertainty, wicked problems, maybe some stuff about fragility, that type of thing included there. In the middle section, again, not necessarily in order, but typically there would be some capability development for senior leaders, supervisors and managers, making them aware and letting them know what's happening. So a bit of, hey, we want to let you know what we're working on, but also this is how you can help. This is going to be how we're going to ask you to be part of it through sort of language and embracing certain ideas. And then ideally some engagement with frontline workers as much as possible, where we ask them, first of all, we explain this is what we're working on and why. We let them know that, because there's going to be some change, typically the background to it. And then ask them what contributes to safety. So the data for the model ideally comes from as many people as possible, if possible frontline staff, so that you can then say, this is what you told us, and it's more meaningful data. The model then gets developed. The what does a safe day look like model gets developed, and usually you do some sense checking, maybe a bit more input, and you'd start then realigning systems. You'd start shifting your strategic planning, start integrating it into inductions, developing your risk library, and start practicing the language shift, start playing with it, and talking more about risk than about safety, and talking more about whether you sort of are managing risk rather than whether you were safe. And with the view that when we come back and sort of say, was today a safe day, and we move away from the idea of safety as an outcome and more as this dynamic process, we embrace the idea that we're shifting onto sort of the meaning and focus of safety being onto what we do every day to tackle risk. We support the shift in language. We've got our artifact developed, which is the safe day model, and then we're sort of rolling it out. And the idea that while this in itself is not a solution, it's a framework that helps organizations talk and focus on risk and safety by doing risk in a more meaningful way. And yes, it is more complex, but with that complexity comes more meaning. So that is it for the whole framework. Thank you very much if you made it this far in all the videos, and if you didn't and dropped in and out, thank you anyway. Obviously, let me know if you've got any questions. Always evolving this and always learning more. So thank you.